My name is Cassidy Harlow, and I wore loyalty like armor until it nearly got me killed. Not physically, but professionally, emotionally, spiritually. 10 years at the same company. 10 years of early mornings, late nights, missed birthdays. Makeup smudged on conference call headsets and PowerPoint decks, tweaked until the last decimal aligned. I was the engine behind half our projects, the one who got things done, while others took credit and left the office by 5. And I was fine with that, until the day my boss replaced me with his son. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this part, so before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you really like what I have to say here. Now get in the mood to listen to this story because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. It started on a Tuesday. I remember because I'd just come back from leading a site inspection on one of our new luxury condo developments. I still had dust on my shoes and sunburn across my cheeks. I walked into the conference room expecting a meeting on the new sustainability initiative we were pitching to the city council. Instead, I walked into a farewell party. My farewell party, except no one had told me I was leaving. There was champagne, pastries, a ridiculous gold foil balloon arch that said "Welcome, Chase." Chase. His son. My heart dropped into my gut. Chase Langford, fresh out of B school, hadn't worked a real job a day in his life. Tan from whatever yacht trip he'd just come back from. I once saw him spill espresso on a proposal and ask if we could fax it back to the cloud. That guy. I turned to my boss, Ron Langford, my mentor, my professional father figure. He couldn't even meet my eyes. "Cass, don't look so surprised," he said, smiling like I should be proud. "You've built such a solid foundation here. Now Chase is going to carry the torch." I felt heat rise to my ears. My throat tightened. I forced a smile I didn't feel and nodded once. "Of course," I said. "Congratulations, Chase." I left the room 5 minutes later, quietly, like a ghost. No scene, no tears. But as I walked down the hallway past the awards, I helped us win the renderings. I managed the interns I trained. I knew something had shifted. I'd thought this company was my home. It was just a temporary stop on a legacy I was never part of. That night I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and counted the people I'd helped, the favors I'd done, the hours I gave for free. I also started a spreadsheet. It wasn't a resignation letter. Not yet. It was a list of everything I had touched. Project timelines, budgeting models, supplier contacts, client quirks, their black market real estate workaround in the East Marina project. Everything. I wasn't angry. I was clinical, clear. This was not going to be a rage story. This was going to be a reckoning. The next day, I walked in earlier than anyone. I downloaded my digital backups, my files, my version history, my calendar notes. Not company property. Mind you, just the intelligence that was mine. Names, numbers, patterns, Ron's tax blind spots. They're legal loopholes. I took my plants and my mug on Friday. I said I was pursuing new opportunities. Nobody noticed I'd copied the company's 3-year supplier transition map, or that I'd had lunch with Sienna Langford the week before. Let me rewind a second. Sienna was Ron's ex-wife. They had divorced 5 years ago in what I now know was a brutal split. She was quiet, graceful, and to most of the staff a ghost story. Someone who used to be at company galas then wasn't. I'd run into her at an art auction. We bonded over overpriced wine and shared exhaustion from playing second to male egos. She didn't say much, then just asked how the company was doing. I told her it was surviving despite itself. She said, "Interesting. Call me if you ever want to build something better." At the time, I didn't understand what she meant. After the Chase stunt, her words snapped into focus like a Polaroid finishing its development. So I did. I called her. We met in a corner booth of an old jazz bar she half-owned. She was wearing a navy cashmere sweater and no makeup. Still beautiful. Still elegant. "I figured you'd call," she said, sipping bourbon. "I always admired you, Cassidy. He treated you like wallpaper. I saw what you actually were, a pillar." She didn't offer sympathy. She offered something better. Capital. "I'll fund you," she said, "if you're ready to do it for yourself." I stared at her. "And in return?" I asked. She smiled, slow and deliberate. I want in. I want a seat at the table. And one day when we're ready, I want to take it from him cleanly, legally, but completely. It was the first time I felt like breathing in a week. Deal, I said. The next day I filed my LLC, and the war began quietly, elegantly, with the precision of someone who'd been watching the game from inside for far too long. I didn't rush. That's the first rule of revenge done right. You don't move fast. You move deliberately, carefully, the way a sculptor chips away at marble knowing exactly where to strike, so the whole thing doesn't collapse too early. The company I built with Sienna was called Vera Maris Development. It meant true sea in Latin, a nod to the ocean view condos we planned to outdo the Langfords on. It also sounded just obscure enough to not raise suspicion. At least not at first. While Ron was throwing Chase into pitch meetings he didn't understand and investor calls he couldn't spell check, I was in a 300-square-foot co-working space in the Marina District setting up a war chest. And I wasn't alone. Remember Amanda, our lead architect who Ron once told to smile more during a pitch? She was the first call I made. I didn't even have to finish the sentence. "I'm in," she said. Then came Marco, finance manager, criminally underpaid twice, passed over for promotion, and Lauren, client relations, who once smoothed over a scandal involving a construction delay and a missing permit without even a ripple hitting the press. All of them joined quietly. All of them knew how Ron and Chase worked. All of them had been used, overlooked, underestimated. But most importantly, they were brilliant and loyal. Not to a logo, but to vision, to fairness, to competency. Sienna, true to her word, didn't micromanage. She gave me room. She didn't want to be seen, not yet. She preferred to operate like a shadow with a checkbook. But when she did speak up, it was gold. "Don't just build a company," she told me one night. "Build the company the one clients whisper about in frustration because they wish it was theirs." So I did. We started small. One project. A boutique duplex renovation near the harbor. Nothing flashy. But we made it beautiful, on time, on budget, with details that people didn't expect. Solar integration, soft close cabinetry, artisan tiled backsplashes. Not mass-manufactured flair, but crafted elegance. And clients noticed. One of them used to be on Ron's client list. It felt like nothing at first, a tiny ripple. But when we delivered ahead of schedule and Chase fumbled a similar project nearby with delays and over-budget contractors, the ripple became a wave. Whispers began. "Why didn't Langford & Co. pitch something like this? You hear Cassidy's firm handled that one. Didn't she used to run ops for Ron?" Chase predictably didn't notice. He thought competitors were only real if they bought billboard space or ran magazine spreads. He didn't realize influence didn't have to shout. It could whisper and still steal everything. We stayed quiet, but I was tracking everything. Each new inquiry, every supplier who called me asking if I'd consider coming back, every email forwarded from someone frustrated with Langford & Co.'s new management style. One day, a vendor who once groveled to Chase for a contract flat out ghosted them. He'd signed with us. Why? Because we paid on time. Because we treated his team like partners, not disposable labor. That's when it began to shift. We weren't just an idea anymore. We were a presence, a rising tide. I remember getting coffee in the financial district one morning when I ran into Ron. He blinked like I was a ghost. "Cassidy," he said, forcing a smile. "How have you been? Heard you're doing something?" Something, I echoed, letting him stew in the ambiguity. "You know," he said, tugging at his cuffs, "you could always come back. Chase is still learning the ropes. We could use someone with your structure." It took everything in me not to laugh. Instead, I tilted my head. "You replace structure with potential," I said. "Let me know how that works out." He didn't reply. A week later, we won a bidding war for a mid-rise property renovation in the Bayview district. Ron's firm had been the front-runner until the investor saw our pitch and reran the numbers. We offered a 12% better return. We also didn't require 3 weeks of internal board approvals because our internal board was me. And just like that, we poached our first big contract. Amanda popped champagne in the office kitchen, if you can call a microwave and a bar fridge a kitchen. Marco hugged me so hard I nearly lost a rib. And Lauren just smiled, calm as ever, and said, "One down." Later that night, I got a text from a blocked number. "Impressive move. Be careful." They don't lose gracefully. It was Sienna. She was right. Because while I was building, Ron was unraveling. Clients were noticing his absence, his silence in meetings, Chase's arrogance, his lack of prep, his inability to adapt. A polished resume can't hide entitlement forever. And somewhere in that unraveling, Ron started to sense something more than coincidence. Someone was moving in on his territory and winning. But he hadn't yet connected the dots. And I wasn't about to light the path for him. We just kept working. Quietly, thoroughly, ruthlessly elegant. You don't need to be loud to win. You just need to be better. I didn't need to spy on them to know things were cracking at Langford & Co. The signs were visible in the way people spoke. A former supplier called to confirm our delivery schedule, then casually mentioned they still haven't paid my last invoice. 2 months past due. A client whispered at a gala, "Cassidy, you're lucky you got out. The Sun thinks a render is something you send to a printer." Chase had the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. And now he was in charge of millions in real estate, with no one around brave enough to tell him when his vision looked like a Pinterest board stapled to a loss projection. But I wasn't interested in watching them fail. That would be too easy and too slow. I was interested in building something they couldn't ignore. We needed more funding. Sienna made the introductions. Private equity firms, boutique venture capitalists, a few silent investors who owed her favors. She would walk into those meetings calm and collected, her smile, knowing her eyes sharper than the diamond studs in her ears. But she never spoke first. That was my job. I walked them through the numbers, our streamlined delivery method, our modular project management structure, our philosophy of quality over quantity. I showed them we were profitable, even small, that we were lean, agile, and rising. One of the firms, Grantbridge Capital, cut us a check the next day. With the influx of funds, we upgraded to a real office. Nothing flashy, but it had doors that closed and floors that didn't echo. We hired a senior designer who used to run a third of Ron's East Coast division. She asked one question before signing. "Is it true Chase made a $6 million design error last quarter?" "Yes," I said. "And no one stopped him." She nodded. "I'm in." That's the thing people don't talk about when it comes to revenge. It attracts the disillusioned, not the lazy, not the bitter, but the ones who tried to do it the right way and got burned for it. My team grew fast. I started having dreams about blueprints and floor plans, about phone calls and marble countertop samples. But they weren't stress dreams. They were victory dreams. Because every time I closed a deal, I wasn't just growing a company, I was reclaiming a piece of myself. One of our early flagship projects, a waterfront remodel near Pacific Heights, went viral on real estate blogs. We didn't pay for PR. We didn't beg influencers. We just built something so clean, so sharp, so satisfying that people couldn't help but share it. And in the comments, I started seeing it. "Wait, isn't this Cassidy Harlow? She used to be at Langford. No wonder this looks like it was done by someone with a brain." It didn't take long before clients started asking for us by name. Then one afternoon I got an email. Subject line: "Question about development consulting urgent." It was from a long-standing client of Ron's, one whose family name was printed on benches, endowments, and local museums. I'd helped onboard them years ago, walked them through 5 luxury properties, and remembered the name of their dog. Now they were emailing me. Their tone was apologetic but direct. "We're considering pulling our upcoming condo project from Langford & Co. The new leadership is hard to explain. Are you open to a conversation?" I wasn't just open, I was thrilled. 2 weeks later, they signed with us. That wasn't just another project, it was a flag in the soil. It told the city that we weren't a boutique upstart anymore. We were a player. It also told Ron that we weren't just competing, we were taking his crown jewel clients. And that's when it happened. He called me. I let it ring. Twice. Then answered as casually as I could manage. "Cassidy." I recognized his tone. Half charm, half desperation. "I hear you've been busy. Busy enough not to miss the boardroom if that's what you're asking." He sighed. "Listen, I know things got messy, but there's no reason we can't." I cut him off. "Ron, if this is about getting me to come back, don't waste your breath." He paused. No, not that. I want to know if you're behind some of these shifts. Shifts, clients, talent, momentum. So he was noticing. I smiled into the silence. Ron, all I did was build what you taught me, only without the ego and nepotism. He didn't respond right away. But before he hung up, he said something I hadn't expected. You've made a mistake aligning with Sienna. She always plays the long game. Just make sure you're not her pawn. I let his words sit for a moment after the call ended. Was he trying to protect me or plant doubt? Either way, it didn't matter. Because the thing about long games, I'd already started playing mine. The deeper we grew, the more carefully I studied every move Langford and Co. made. They began to pivot aggressively. Cheap marketing stunts, billboards, branded umbrellas handed out at real estate expos. It was loud, sloppy, desperate. I knew that kind of chaos. It wasn't strategy. It was survival dressed in PowerPoint. Meanwhile, our company Vera Maris grew quieter, sleeker, sharper. We started getting invites to high-end architecture panels not because we asked, but because we delivered. Amanda presented at a sustainable urbanism forum and had half the attendees come up to her afterward asking if she was accepting private clients. Marco, our finance guy, streamlined our operations so efficiently, we cut operating costs by 19% without layoffs. Our office felt calm, focused, like we were breathing air that Ron's firm had polluted for years. Then one morning, Lauren walked into my office holding a red envelope. Another client defection, I asked with a half smile. Better, she said. An invite. It was for the Langford & Co. annual real estate gala, the biggest event of the season. The kind of party where political consultants, developers, even judges showed up to shake hands and pretend not to hate each other. I wasn't on the invite list last year, I said, flipping the envelope in my hand. You are now, Lauren replied. And so is Sienna. Oh, this would be fun. Sienna didn't hesitate. We'll go, she said, dabbing espresso into her lipstick print napkin. And we'll dress to make them choke. I wore black satin sharp shoulders, deep neckline, minimal jewelry. Confidence in cloth. Sienna wore a backless navy number with a slit that made every man in the room turn twice, and every woman size her up in silence. We walked in side by side, and the room stopped. Ron was by the champagne tower laughing too loud. His smile froze mid-sip when he saw us. Cassidy, he said, blinking like we were hallucinations. Sienna. Ron, we replied in unison. Chase wasn't there. I later learned he'd flown to Tulum with a model/DJ to clear his head. He would have been eaten alive here anyway. The party was glitter and veneer, but the undertone was different this year. People looked at us with questions in their eyes. Not just curiosity, but interest. We weren't nobodies anymore. We were a firm with momentum. Ron tried to corner me near the dessert bar. I don't know what story Sienna's selling you, but be careful, he said, biting into a canale. You don't get to build an empire by being soft. I agree, I replied. That's why I'm not selling a story. I'm just building what you thought I couldn't. He scoffed. Let's see how long your little startup survives when the market turns. Funny, I said. I was about to say the same thing to you. We left soon after. But before we did, Sienna made sure to drop one detail into the right ears. We're exploring acquisitions. 2 days later, I got a call from a contractor Ron had blacklisted years ago for something petty, wearing sneakers to a site inspection. I heard you're expanding, he said. I'd love to bid on your next project. No offense, but Langford's gone soft. I didn't laugh. I simply said, we'll send over specs this week. We were no longer just a boutique dev firm. We were becoming a threat. That's when the sabotage began. Emails to our clients with urgent warnings about my leadership, spoofed invoices, a fake Yelp review claiming we left a project site filled with mold. Classic clumsy corporate warfare. We didn't engage. We didn't respond. Instead, we posted a case study of our last project with a time-lapse video of the transformation and a client testimonial that said, "It was the first time I didn't feel condescended to on my own property." Let Ron try to beat that with an umbrella. But even I wasn't ready for what happened next. One of our employees, a junior designer, walked into my office shaking. I think I made a mistake, she said. She had accidentally forwarded an internal strategy doc to the wrong email address. Guess whose? Yep, Langford & Co. It was an outline of our pipeline for the next 3 quarters. Projects, leads, design notes. I stared at the wall for a full minute. Then I turned back to her. Thank you for telling me. You did the right thing. We had 2 options, panic or pivot. We pivoted. Amanda and I stayed up all night rewriting every design spec and timeline. We rerouted contractors, requoted materials, shifted order sequences. By Monday, what they had was obsolete. And just to send a message, we posted our updated flagship project publicly with a new design philosophy that hadn't been in the leaked file. That was the moment I realized we weren't just winning anymore. We were dominating. And someone on their side knew it. Because that night I got another anonymous text. This isn't over, but you're playing it beautifully. By this point, we weren't just stealing market share. We were rewriting the rules. Langford & Co. was built on image. We were building on results. And results don't need spotlights. They generate their own gravity. But success comes with shadows. The more visible Vera Maris became, the more the whispers started circling Sienna. She's just doing this to get back at Ron. Didn't she get half the company in the divorce anyway? No, I heard she lost everything. It was always framed as gossip, never spoken directly to her face, but I knew she felt it. One evening, I found her alone on the office balcony staring over the bay, the wind teasing strands of hair from her chignon. They're scared of you, I said. She didn't turn. They're scared of what you represent. And what's that? She murmured. A woman who didn't disappear, who got smarter. Finally, she looked at me. I used to wonder, she said quietly, if staying invisible made me stronger. Maybe I thought I could be the ghost that haunted him. I waited, but I'm tired of being quiet, she finished. That was the night she officially took the title of co-chairwoman of Vera Maris. And when the press got hold of it, the headlines practically wrote themselves. Ron Langford's ex-wife and former COO team, up to disrupt real estate market. The article went viral in our industry circles, and it landed right on Ron's desk, because 2 days later I received a formal letter from his legal team, cease and desist, alleging misappropriation of proprietary project methodology and client data. I scanned it and smiled. Empty threats, based on nothing. I handed it to Marco. Scan it, log it, and frame it if you want, I told him. We weren't stealing anything from Ron. We didn't need to. We were winning because we were better. But his legal move told me something. He was unraveling faster than I thought. And then came the leak. An anonymous email sent to several media outlets claiming that Langford & Co. had overbilled a major investor on a multi-unit project by nearly 18%. The email included partial invoices, internal memos, and this part caught my eye, a forwarded message from Ron himself, approving the billing tactic as standard inflation. Suddenly, the lawsuit didn't matter. He was the news now. I wasn't behind the leak. Neither was Sienna. But we had both received the email too, and we both knew what it meant. Someone inside Langford & Co. wanted to jump ship and burn it down behind them. We stayed quiet. The scandal brewed for a week. Clients pulled back. Investors stalled meetings. Construction vendors started demanding upfront payments from them, citing unconfirmed account solvency. Then came the second twist. I was sitting in my office reviewing floor samples for a minimalist villa design in Napa when Lauren burst in. You'll want to see this. She turned her phone to show me an article on the local business news site. Langford & Co. shareholders call emergency board meeting amid allegations. I read it twice. Then at the very bottom, a single line. Sources claim that a silent investor is lobbying to replace executive leadership. My stomach did a slow turn. Silent investor, lobbying. I turned to Lauren. Who owns shares in Langford? She blinked. You mean besides Ron? Yes. She pulled up her iPad, scrolled, tapped. There are legacy investors from the 2000s. A few venture groups. Oh, and… She stopped. I raised an eyebrow. Sienna, she said softly. Through a trust. She still holds 12%. I leaned back in my chair. Oh no. Or maybe, oh yes. That night, I invited Sienna to dinner. I made pasta from scratch and poured us both glasses of red wine. I got your name off the Langford Investor Registry, I said, casually twirling tagliatelle. She took a sip. Must be a very old spreadsheet. You're lobbying for an executive replacement, I said. She met my eyes and smiled. Not yet, she replied. But it's starting to look like a good idea, doesn't it? I nearly dropped my fork. You never told me you still had equity. I never told you a lot of things, she said with a sip. But I always planned for this to end. Beautifully. Suddenly, everything made sense. Her timing, her patience, her silence until the right moment. She hadn't just been helping me build something. She had been preparing for this final move all along. But to her credit, she looked at me that night and said, I never used you, Cassidy. You were the first person who didn't ask me what he did. You asked me what I wanted to do. That's why I trusted you. I nodded. I just didn't know I was in a game of chess. You weren't, she said. Until now. The boardroom smelled like old leather, stale cologne, and fear. Sienna and I sat side by side at the long mahogany table, polished heavy, designed for intimidation. But it didn't work on us. We'd come in sleek and silent like the cold front before a thunderstorm. Ron was already there, flipping through documents he wasn't reading, pretending this wasn't the most important meeting of his life. Let's not drag this out, he said, voice gruff, worn down. This is a smear campaign and I won't stand for it. The chairman of the board, a silver-haired man with reading glasses and no patience, looked at him over the rim of his lenses. We've reviewed the documents, he said, and we've reviewed the projected financial loss if we continue with the current leadership. A murmur passed around the table. Ron's jaw tightened. You think this is her? He jabbed a finger in Sienna's direction. This is personal. She didn't flinch. Ron, she said calmly, you taught me one thing worth remembering. Business is personal. The room fell silent. I watched his expression, how his bluster wavered, how the shadows under his eyes seemed darker than usual. For the first time, he looked small, not the titan I'd worked under for 10 years, just a man who thought power was permanent. He turned to me. And you, he said, you were nothing before I gave you a chance. I leaned forward, hands clasped. You didn't give me a chance, I said quietly. You gave me work. I built the rest. Then I slid a folder across the table. Inside. Projections for Langford's next fiscal quarter. Compiled by someone inside the company. Someone still loyal to competence over bloodlines. Someone who wanted me to know what was coming before it hit. They showed downward spirals. Client losses. Escalating costs from bad decisions. And worst of all, a note that Chase had greenlit a coastal project with unstable permits and no environmental clearance. Ron stared at the numbers. His face paled. Who gave you this? He muttered. I don't need to tell you that, I said. But if you're wondering how many people inside your company want change, you're looking at the tip of it. The vote began. 7 board members. 3 were already aligned with Sienna's trust stake. 2 more had been swayed by investor pressure after the billing scandal. The 6th paused, then voted yes. The final vote, abstained. It didn't matter. The motion passed. Ron Langford was removed as CEO of Langford & Co. He stood up slowly like his bones had grown heavier. This company was mine, he said, eyes flicking between us. I built it. Sienna rose too. You built it by ignoring everyone who helped you. And now they're the ones holding the tools. He didn't look at me again. He walked out. No handshake. No exit speech. Just the sound of his expensive loafers echoing across a floor that no longer belonged to him. The room exhaled, then turned toward me. I felt every eye, every breath, every unspoken expectation. I looked to Sienna. She gave a slight nod. So I stood. Let's make one thing clear, I said. We're not here to clean up a mess. We're here to build something better, transparent, strategic, relentlessly efficient. If you're on board with that, great. If not, step aside. And just like that, I became the new CEO of Langford & Co. Except we weren't keeping the name. Within a week, we folded it into Vera Maris Holdings, a clean merger legally airtight. The legacy company was absorbed into ours like water into sand. Chase, gone. Fired without ceremony. He tried to play victim online, posting a 7-minute rant about toxic work cultures and bitter women, but it backfired. The comments section became a masterclass in poetic justice. Meanwhile, Sienna and I did what we always did. Got back to work. Our first rebranded development opened 6 months later. Ultra-modern homes with clean lines, solar roofing, and community gardens. We named the project Horizon Rise. It sold out in a week. The reviews were glowing, not just about the design, but about the leadership, about the story behind it all. Because people love a comeback, but they adore a quiet coup. We never bragged, never gloated, just delivered again and again. But one evening as we walked through the new project, Sienna stopped beside me. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "The old days." I shook my head. "I miss the version of me who thought loyalty was armor," I said. "But I love the one who learned how to use it as leverage." She smiled. And for the first time, we both let ourselves breathe. No more war. No more ghosts. Just legacy rebuilt by the ones who were never supposed to hold the hammer. By the time the merger was finalized, it felt like I'd lived 3 lives inside one career. Cassidy the employee. Cassidy the strategist. Cassidy the architect of quiet revolutions. But here's the thing. Most people never tell you. Success doesn't always come with trumpets. Sometimes it's a whispered email at 2:47, confirming a contract. A silent smile from a client who moved millions into your corner because you made them feel seen. The dull thud of old enemies realizing they don't matter anymore. We expanded quickly but precisely. 3 cities in 6 months: San Diego, Austin, and Portland. Each location chosen not for prestige, but for opportunity. Sienna and I had developed a rhythm. She handled the legal understructure, and I navigated every operational detail like a surgeon in the dark hands, steady breath held. Amanda was leading a new design vertical now. Her first project won an award before it was even completed. Marco was mentoring interns, paying forward the respect no one had once given him. Lauren. She became our chief client officer, probably the only person alive who could close a $30 million deal with a post-it note and a dry espresso. And me, I stopped thinking in survival mode. I started thinking in legacy, until one email arrived and made me pause. It came from Ron Langford. Subject: "Congratulations." No attachments, no pleasantries. Just a 4-line message. "You were always going to beat us." I just didn't want to believe it. "I hope Chase learned something from watching you because I sure did." I stared at it for a long time. I didn't respond. I forwarded it to Sienna. Her reply came within seconds. "He finally wrote something worth saving." Maybe Ron wasn't the villain anymore. Or maybe the villain had just finally understood the ending. Either way, he was no longer part of our story. But Chase was, and he wasn't done yet. Weeks later, a journalist reached out. "Hi, Cassidy. Working on a piece about nepotism, fallout, and family firms in real estate." Chase Langford's been quoted anonymously about Vera Maris and the toxic coup at Langford & Co. "Would you like to comment?" I could have replied, could have defended everything, could have listed spreadsheets, client satisfaction reports, internal vote logs. But instead I sent back, "Let him speak. We'll keep building, because no matter how many headlines someone chases, they can't outrun results." That same week, we landed a city contract to redevelop an entire waterfront stretch one Chase had once pitched and lost because he showed up late and called the councilwoman miss. When we broke ground, I stood with a hard hat on my head and steel-toe boots in freshly dug earth. The mayor shook my hand and said, "You're changing the shape of this city." And I smiled. Because I wasn't just changing cities. I was changing narratives. Every now and then, someone would ask, "Isn't it weird working with your former boss's ex-wife?" I'd usually just smile and let them wonder. But once I answered honestly, "She's not someone's ex-wife," I said. "She's the best partner I've ever had." Because the truth is, power doesn't always wear a name tag or arrive in a 3-piece suit. Sometimes it wears red lipstick and a navy sheath dress, says nothing for years, and then rebuilds the very world that once rejected her. And me. I finally understood that revenge wasn't about taking someone down. It was about lifting yourself higher, so high they can't even see where you went. By the time our 5th headquarters opened, this one in Miami, I barely recognized the woman in the mirror. Not because she looked different. Same dark eyes, same sharp jawline, same low ponytail I'd worn since my intern days. But because she was finally still, there was no scrambling, no proving, no begging for a seat at a table someone else built. Now the table was mine, and I decided who sat at it. And one of those seats was about to be offered to someone unexpected. We were preparing to launch the Sienna Fund, a mentorship and funding initiative for female-led development firms. It was Sienna's idea, her real legacy. She said not the company, but the pathway for others. She asked me, "Do you know anyone from your past who deserves a second chance?" I didn't even need a second to answer. Elena Carr, my old assistant. Brilliant, overqualified, and underappreciated. She left Langford after being publicly scolded by Chase for forgetting a printed agenda when he'd emailed her the wrong version himself. She disappeared after that. I tried to find her. No LinkedIn, no digital footprint, like she'd gone dark. But I never forgot her. So we tracked her down through a friend of a contractor who remembered her name. Turns out she was freelancing in rural Colorado doing design layouts for local eco-homes. I called her personally. She didn't pick up. So I emailed, "I've got a second chance with your name on it. Call me." She responded 20 minutes later. Her voice shook when she said, "I thought everyone forgot me." "No," I replied. "We were just busy rebuilding the world without the noise." We flew her in, gave her a full-time offer, benefits, team, respect. She cried in the elevator on her first day. That moment reminded me, we weren't building a business anymore. We were building a haven, a quiet rebellion against everything we once had to endure. And just like that, the Sienna Fund took off. In its first quarter, we approved 5 grants for women-led projects, all focused on sustainability, community integration, and equity, not just in dollars, but in decisions. Sienna looked at the final report and said, "If I'd had something like this 15 years ago." I know I said, "Sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't personal. It's structural. It's making sure the ladder doesn't disappear once you've climbed it. It's building a system so no one else has to navigate the old broken one." Around this time, a reporter asked me what I considered my proudest moment. I thought they wanted me to talk about the boardroom takeover or the viral properties or the merger. But I told them about Elena, about the grants, about the interns we were sending abroad on architecture scholarships. "Isn't that more legacy than revenge?" the reporter asked. And I said, "Exactly." I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't even think about Ron unless someone else brought him up. And when they did, I didn't feel that old heat behind my ribs. Just quiet, stillness. That was the real victory. Not that I'd risen above him, but that I no longer had to remember him to know where I belonged. The funny thing about power is, it gets quiet the longer you hold it. In the beginning, it shouts. You crave the validation, the proof, the titles. But eventually, it becomes a whisper behind everything you do. A presence in the room even when you say nothing. We were in our second year post-merger when I felt that shift fully. Vera Maris wasn't the underdog anymore. We were the gold standard. People started mimicking our workflows, referencing our values in mission statements, even trying to mirror our color palette in their branding. We knew we had arrived when a competitor pitched a client with a line I had once used in a strategy session verbatim. I should have been annoyed, but instead I felt oddly amused. We were trendsetters now. One afternoon, I received a request to speak at a national architecture and development conference in Seattle. The theme, Modern Empires, Building with Purpose. They wanted me to deliver the keynote. Sienna encouraged me. "Tell the truth," she said. "People don't just want the blueprint. They want the bruises." So I told them. I stood in front of a room full of investors, designers, bureaucrats, and CEOs, and I didn't hide the messy parts. I told them how I'd been replaced, how I'd left quietly, how I had dinner with the one person no one expected, my former boss's ex-wife, and how together we built something not just to compete, but to transform. I didn't mention names. I didn't need to, but the impact rippled. After the speech, dozens of women approached me, some in real estate, some not, some with startups, some with scars. They all said the same thing in different ways. That happened to me. I've never heard someone say it out loud. You just gave me permission to not disappear. It was the first time I truly realized the story wasn't just mine. It belonged to all of us who had ever been dismissed, replaced, rewritten in someone else's narrative. I returned home with something more than applause. I came back with resolve. We started a storytelling initiative within Vera Maris. We called it the Quiet Voices Project, a series of interviews, documentaries, and first-person essays from women in architecture, construction design, and real estate about the challenges they faced and the triumphs they made in spite of them. No flashy branding, no filters, just truth. And it spread like wildfire. Universities began using it in leadership programs. Trade groups reached out to sponsor regional chapters. Young interns who had been too afraid to speak now felt emboldened to ask questions in meetings, challenge design's lead. That was the real revolution. Sienna and I would watch each new release together over a glass of wine. Sometimes we cried, but mostly we nodded, because every voice that rose from the silence reminded us. This revenge wasn't just personal anymore. It was generational. Around this time, I got another unexpected invitation, this time from a familiar address. Ron's former assistant, now working in city development, reached out with an offer. They wanted Vera Maris to oversee the reconstruction of the old financial district's landmark tower, a building Ron had once called his empire's spine. The irony was almost poetic. I hesitated. I stared at the request for a long time. Then I sent a short reply. We accept. And we'll do it right this time. Because some ghosts don't need to be banished. They just need to be outlived. There it was, tall, brittle, and hollow. Once the pride of Ron Langford's empire, now a crumbling shell of ego and outdated design. The foundation had cracks. The plumbing had failed inspections 3 years running. Tenants had slowly moved out as maintenance became more symbolic than functional. It was a metaphor dressed in concrete. And now we were tasked with restoring it. No, not restoring, redefining it. I stood in front of the building on the first day of the project, construction helmet under my arm, sunlight slicing through the skyline. It wasn't nostalgia I felt, it was clarity. Ron had always imagined this tower as a monument to himself, a crown, an obituary in waiting. But monuments don't matter if no one wants to walk inside. So we changed everything. Amanda led the redesign. She stripped it down to steel and glass, keeping only the core beams and panoramic intent. She softened the silhouette, added rooftop gardens and community co-working spaces. It would no longer be a symbol of dominance, but of access. We renamed it too, from Langford Tower to the Horizon Spire. That name made headlines. And so did the fact that the redesign team was 72% female. The press asked for interviews. The developer tried to use it for clout. Even Chase tweeted something like, "Amazing to see my father's legacy evolve in today's climate." I didn't respond. But someone did. Sienna. She quoted his tweet and wrote, "Correction. It didn't evolve. It was replaced. Brick by brick, woman by woman." It went viral. The Horizon Spire opened 9 months later. Clean, modern, light pouring through every floor like possibility. On opening day, I was handed a pair of gold scissors and asked to cut the ceremonial ribbon. Reporters gathered. City officials clapped. But the moment that stopped me, truly stopped me, was an elderly woman in a navy pantsuit standing quietly behind the crowd. Ron's former head of HR, the woman who once warned me privately that I would never get the promotion I deserved. She approached slowly. "Cassidy," she said, "I came to see what survival looks like." I gave her a tired smile. "This isn't survival. This is what happens when you let people build without fear." She nodded, then handed me a small faded folder. "I kept your old review notes," she said. "The ones Ron deleted before final submission. You deserve that promotion." I wasn't brave then. I took it, gently, tucked it under my arm like something sacred. "I'm glad you are now," I said. Later that night, I opened the folder alone in my office. There, it was my performance evaluation from 5 years ago. A line written in black ink under leadership potential. "Far exceeds expectations. Could run this company in 5 years." It wasn't signed, but I knew Ron wrote it, and then buried it. So maybe the truth had always been there, just hidden, just feared. Now it was in the light, and light changes everything. I placed the folder in my drawer, not for revenge, for record keeping, for remembering that silence doesn't always mean failure. Sometimes it's just a story waiting for a louder ending. Every empire leaves debris behind. Not just the buildings or the email chains or the business cards fading in forgotten drawers, but the people. Some stay, some vanish, and some return in the strangest ways. It was mid-October when Chase Langford walked through the doors of Vera Maris headquarters. He didn't have an appointment. Lauren intercepted him at reception. "He's in the lobby," she told me over the intercom, barely concealing the amusement in her voice. Wearing loafers with no socks and holding a folder labeled Partnership Opportunities. I almost laughed. Almost. But I told her, let him up. Because sometimes the best closure is seeing the people who tried to bury you walk into the building you built. He entered with a half smile that tried too hard and eyes that had aged too quickly. "Cass," he said. "Wow. Look at this place." "It's grown," I replied flatly. He took a seat across from my desk and set the folder down like it contained a peace treaty. I didn't touch it. "I've been consulting," he said, "trying to get my footing after everything. I thought maybe there's a way we could collaborate." The word hung in the air like spoiled perfume. I tilted my head. Collaborate. You've got reach. I've got name recognition. There's potential. He was still doing it. Still assuming his last name was a currency anyone wanted to exchange. "Chase," I said slowly, "do you know why this company succeeded?" He opened his mouth, but I cut him off. "Because we knew how to listen. To clients. To markets. To people. You never learned how to do that." He blinked. "I'm not trying to argue," he said quickly. I'm looking for a path forward." "There is one," I replied, "but it doesn't run through this building." I stood. "You can rebuild, you can redefine yourself, but you don't get to ride the coattails of the people you once dismissed." He stood too, a little slower. For the first time, I saw something behind his eyes that I hadn't seen before. Shame. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He just nodded. "I had to try," he murmured. "I know," I said. And then he left. And I felt nothing. No triumph, no bitterness. Just peace. The next morning, Sienna brought coffee to my office. "Lauren told me about our visitor," she said, sipping her Americano. "How did it feel?" "Like erasing a file I no longer need," I said. She smiled. "You're getting better at that." I looked at her. "We both are." That weekend, I hosted the first Vera Maris alumni dinner, an annual event we'd begun to honor every former team member who'd moved on to start their own firm launch, their own vision, or blaze new trails. There were dozens of them now. We rented a rooftop, strung lights between steel beams, and watched the city glow beneath us. And for a moment, I stood apart and just watched. These weren't just employees. They were echoes of the woman I used to be and upgrades of the woman I'd become. People toasted, laughed, told stories. No one mentioned Ron. No one needed to. His chapter was closed. Ours. Still being written with brighter ink, steadier hands, and no ceiling above our heads. Sometimes I still wake up early before the sun climbs up the skyline. Not because I have to. Because that hour when the world is quiet and no one needs anything from me is the hour when I remember who I used to be. The woman who stood in a conference room full of balloons and fake congratulations, her heart pounding with betrayal, her smile barely stitched together. She had no plan, no backup, just grit. And now I rise in a penthouse apartment built by my own company, drink coffee roasted by a supplier who pitched me, and scroll through emails that start with, "We'd be honored to work with Vera Maris." We'd made it. But here's the truth. No one prepares you for. Victory gets lonelier, not because people vanish, but because your perspective stretches wider than theirs. The problems you solve now are more layered, the stakes higher, the margins for error thinner, and yet, there's also peace. The peace of not needing approval, of trusting your instincts, of knowing your power doesn't depend on someone else recognizing it. One afternoon, I was invited to speak at a business school, my old alma mater, ironically. They wanted me to talk about the pivot, how I went from employee to executive. But I decided to tell them something more important. I titled my lecture, "The Power of Being Replaced." Their faces tightened when I said it. Sometimes I told them you have to lose the job you thought you wanted to discover the mission you were meant for. I told them how being replaced by a legacy hire was the best thing that ever happened to me. How betrayal sharpened me. how silence protected me. How partnership unexpected and once taboo became the anchor for everything I built. Afterward, a young woman with trembling hands approached me. "I was just let go," she whispered. "The CEO brought in her nephew. I feel disposable." I looked her in the eyes. "You're not," I said. "You're just free now. And that's more dangerous than you think." That conversation stayed with me. It reminded me why I still show up, why I still push, why I still care. Not for headlines, not for revenge, but for her, and all the women like her who needed someone to walk through the fire first. Later that month, we launched the Reclamation Series, a podcast where women from all industries shared stories of dismissal, erasure, and comeback. It was raw, honest, imperfect. It was a mirror for the ones still finding their voice. And it was my most personal project yet, because no matter how many towers we built or contracts we won, the work that mattered most was reminding others, you can come back stronger than the people who counted you out. You can hire the ex-wife, build the rival firm, rewrite the narrative, and make them watch. Not out of spite, but because you earned every inch of the ground they thought you'd never stand on again. The following year brought something unexpected. An award. I had never chased them, not even considered them. Vera Maris wasn't built on prestige. It was built on principle. But somehow the reputation found its way into the right rooms. The email subject line read, "Congratulations, recipient of the Vanguard Architecture and Equity Leadership Prize." I stared at the screen for a long time, then forwarded it to Sienna with no message. Her reply came in seconds. "Wear something with shoulder pads. You're making history." The award wasn't just for buildings. It was for impact, for changing the who and how behind development. And though my name was etched on the plaque, it didn't belong to just me. It belonged to the interns we mentored, the women we funded, the voices we amplified, the clients we prioritized. Not because of status, but because of vision. The ceremony was black tie, of course. I walked onto the stage in a sleek navy suit, hair pulled into a no-nonsense bun. The room flooded with applause I couldn't quite absorb. I stood behind the microphone and looked out. And there in the fourth row sat Elena. Next to her, Marco. Behind them, Lauren, Amanda, and half a dozen others who had walked through fire with me. And Sienna in burgundy silk smiled from the front row, exactly where she deserved to be. I cleared my throat. "I used to believe the only way to succeed in this industry was to play quiet," I began. "To be agreeable. To never be too much." A ripple of laughter moved through the audience, mostly women. But then one day, someone took the thing I thought I needed most, my title, my job, my future, and handed it to someone who didn't earn it. And I thought it would break me. I paused. But it didn't. It revealed me. Now the room was still. I stand here today, not because I followed the rules, but because I rewrote them. And I didn't do it alone. I did it beside a team who were once told they weren't enough. And a woman. Yes, his ex-wife who saw in me what no board ever did. Capacity. Sienna lowered her eyes, blinking slowly. But her smile grew. I closed with one sentence. "If they leave you out of the blueprint, draw your own damn floor plan." The room erupted. After the ceremony, people swarmed, shook my hand, took photos, asked questions. I answered graciously, but with half my attention still tethered to something quieter. The journey. That jagged, slow climb from replacement to reclaiming, from silent contributor to decisive leader, from overlooked to undeniable. Later that night on the balcony of my hotel room, I looked over the lights of the city we'd just signed our 9th development deal in. I turned to Sienna, who stood beside me, barefoot, sipping tea. "You think we've peaked?" I asked. She grinned. "We haven't even put in the penthouse yet." And just like that, we laughed, loud and unguarded, because the view was spectacular. But what mattered more was who I was sharing it with. There was one more chapter left, one that I never planned, never saw coming. But it changed everything. It started with a letter, a real one. Not an email, not a text, a letter, handwritten. Delivered in a navy envelope with my name scrawled in pen I instantly recognized. Ron Langford. I hadn't heard from him since the day he walked out of that boardroom stripped of his title and wrapped in silence. I opened it carefully, uncertain what I would find. Cassidy. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. Not in a dramatic sense, just retiring. Fully. No more consulting. No more legacy chasing. Just me, a fishing boat, and enough books to forget I ever owned cufflinks. I've spent the last year thinking about everything. What I built, what I broke, and who I underestimated. You were never meant to stay in my shadow. You were always too sharp, too steady, too much of a threat. And that's not a criticism, it's a confession. I replaced you because I thought I could control what came next. I didn't realize that you were what came next. What you and Sienna built, it's better than anything I could have created. And that's hard for me to say, but it's true. So if you're willing, here's what I'd like. Take the cabin. Up north. The one you once said reminded you of your grandparents' lake house. I put it in a trust. It's yours. No conditions. Just thanks. And maybe a little redemption. Ron. I read it twice. Then a third time. Then folded it gently and placed it in my desk drawer, right beside the old performance review he never submitted. Later that month, I drove to the cabin. It was small, wooden, overlooking a lake so still it felt like glass. Inside, the furniture was worn but clean. There was a framed photo of Ron and a much younger Chase standing in front of the tower we had once renamed. I didn't take it down. Instead, I sat on the porch barefoot, a cup of coffee in my hands, and I watched the morning mist lift. For the first time in a long time, I thought of Ron without anger. Just reflection. He had been wrong. About me. About Sienna. About what it means to lead. But in the end, he tried to make it right. And that mattered. I stayed for 3 days, wrote nothing, checked no emails, just existed. Let the quiet stretch out like fabric. Let the old version of myself dissolve into the wood. And when I returned to the city, I was lighter, more certain, because I knew now that the story was complete. Not the empire that was still growing, but the revenge. That had long ago transformed into something more powerful, grace. And that was the real endgame all along. A year later, I stood in front of a blank wall. Not just any wall, our wall. Inside our new flagship headquarters, nestled between skylit beams and soundless glass partitions, there was a space we'd kept intentionally bare. A symbol, a question. What would go there? Not a timeline. Not a photo of our founding team. Not an abstract painting. Something better. It was Amanda who first said it out loud. What if it's everyone? So we commissioned an installation. A textured timeline made from reclaimed wood, steel, and glass, each slat engraved with the names of every person who had ever helped build Vera Maris. Interns, contractors, accountants, even the night janitor who left post-its with motivational quotes on our desks when we used to work past midnight. We called it the Foundation. On opening day, people we hadn't seen in years returned. Some with new titles, others with gray in their hair, all with stories tied to what we'd built. I watched them trace their fingers across the wall, like it was a sacred artifact. And maybe it was, because we hadn't just built towers, or condos, or urban renewal hubs. We had built a movement. Later that night, I gave a short speech. Nothing rehearsed, no cards, just instinct. I once lost everything in a room where no one thought I belonged. I said, but I didn't burn that room down. I just walked out and built something better across the street. Laughter, applause, but the kind that feels warm, not performative. Then I added something I hadn't planned to say. And someday, someone younger and bolder than me will do the same thing to this. They'll outgrow us, outsmart us, redefine us. And that's the point. Because what we've built here isn't an empire. It's a launch pad. Sienna was in the back, leaning against the doorframe, her arms folded, a rare tear glistening in her left eye. After the event, she found me in the quietest corner of the rooftop. "You're not done, you know?" she said softly. I smirked. "You mean the company?" "No," she said. "The story." I thought about that for a second. She was right. Because Vera Maris wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about resilience, about reinvention, about what happens when women stop asking for permission and start writing their own playbook. And mine wasn't finished, not even close. The next morning, I boarded a plane to Tokyo to explore a green infrastructure project we'd been eyeing. I brought no one but a sketchbook and a vision. Because even now, with the winds behind me, the empire humming and the echoes quiet, I still had blueprints to draw. Because as long as someone else out there was being underestimated, I had work to do.